And I now look to Michael Spak, the LGBTQIA+ officer of the Oxford Union, to open the case for the opposition.
On February 24th, 2014, President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda signed into law a statute criminalizing homosexuality throughout the country. Those found guilty of same-sex intercourse or marriage are punished with life in prison. Organizations or individuals found to be promoting homosexuality would receive steep fines in between 5 and 7 years in prison. Appallingly, the law also requires that citizens report to the police anyone who is suspected of being gay. In Uganda, there is no longer any room for even tacit tolerance of homosexuality. Both homosexuality and allyhood have been banned. The signing of this bill marked a dark day for the LGBTQ community in Uganda and around the world. Many brave activists, for their part, have continued their work in the shadow of society, forming an underground campaign to change the law. Frank Mugisha understands the danger inherent to the task. He recognizes that his group's gatherings could be raided by the police at any moment. But their challenge extends further than the police and legal proceedings. The new persecutive law has led activists in the country to seek out allies. Indeed, it is a lack of social support that has led to this draconian law. Mugisha told The Guardian, "Changing laws is not hard. But what we really need to do in the long term is change minds. We need to meet and educate communities about LGBTI issues because ultimately we are not up against the government. We are up against society and up against ignorance." Here, Mugisha has struck at the heart of the LGBTQ movement. Political equality is the final goal in a long and difficult fight. The situation in Uganda is a stark reminder that allies play an essential role in advancing the rights of LGBTQ people, and that when we are isolated, we are powerless. The purpose of the movement has always been twofold. First, to encourage LGBTQ people to celebrate their identities, and second, to persuade society of our social and political equality. Tonight, I will argue that, in both aims, allies are an irreplaceable means and a crucial end of the LGBTQ movement. It is through allies that a society conveys respect to LGBTQ individuals. This process is crucial to the dignity of these individuals and to the promise of achieving equality. We, LGBTQ people, are spread out, isolated, and often socially invisible. Therefore, individual communities must be clear in their support of LGBTQ rights, and allies must share much of the burden in procuring those rights. I will argue that, rather than crowding out our voices, allies augment them. Finally, I will comment on the difficult nature of maintaining and furthering social progress. I believe firmly that it requires the continuous and active safekeeping by those who recognize our equality. But first, it falls to me to introduce the speakers for the proposition tonight. You've just heard from the lovely Molly Moore, a theology student at Christ Church and a staunch advocate for our community. She's the president of the LGBTQ Society here in Oxford and a tremendous advocate and organizer. I only met Molly last week, and she doesn't have a Wikipedia page, so I don't have enough material for a joke here. So tonight I'll just stick to saying that I've enjoyed working together so far, and I hope that our disagreement tonight won't prevent us from doing so in the future. Scott Bixby is a distinguished American journalist, commentator, and expert. He has covered U.S. politics and LGBTQ issues for a number of prominent publications. We are honored that Scott has chosen to join us here tonight, of all nights, on the eve of the collapse of Western civilization. We are delighted that he has come all the way from the U.S. and if he feels reluctant to go back, we won't blame him. Nikki Sinclair is a former member of the European Parliament for West Midlands, for the UK Independence Party, and then the We Demand a Referendum Party. She was the first openly trans British parliamentarian and later sued UKIP for gender discrimination. She is a distinguished public servant, and we are delighted to have her here tonight. Mr. President, these are your speakers, and they are most welcome. Honorable members and guests, tonight I hope to establish that prominent and vocal allies are essential to the progress of the LGBTQ movement and to the achievement of its purpose. The movement, broadly speaking, seeks to advance two essential goals. The first is to encourage LGBTQ people to embrace and celebrate their identities. The second goal is to persuade our communities, made up of mostly straight, cisgendered people, to accept us and to ensure our social and political equality. Often we do this by raising our voices, marching, lobbying, and organizing. All of these actions, I assure you, have been critical to the extraordinary recent progress that we've made, particularly in Western liberal democracies. But I contend that this process entails something far deeper than the ordinary politics of mobilization. It targets the changing of hearts and minds. This process is deeply personal. It requires one to recognize the equal humanity of someone who is different in a way that may conflict with one's previously held notions of social and moral acceptability. It is no simple task, but it is through this process that we gain allies. It is through this process that we achieve progress. This creation of new allies is essential for any minority to gain the equality it deserves, and it is particularly important due to the nature of our challenge in the LGBTQ community. Any minority within a society depends on the majority to affirm its political and social equal standing. Allies play an essential role in this process. When a member of society becomes an ally, they send a strong message to the LGBTQ people and to the various communities to which they belong. They communicate to both groups that they value LGBTQ people equally to others and support their rights. But why should this have any effect on their dignity? The most important reason is that we are truly social creatures. We derive our dignity from within ourselves, but also from the respect that is shown to us by families, friends, communities, and other social groups. This dignity is essential to the ability of LGBTQ individuals to feel comfortable and to express and celebrate their identities. For centuries, Western society broadly denied LGBTQ citizens this dignity through criminalization, marginalization, and oppression. In reversing this trend, we have learned that to respect the equal value of another person, we must affirm it through social and political change, which are again both the means and the end of progress. At this point, I've established that allies are necessary for the progress of the LGBTQ movement. My opponents will likely agree. But the question we aim to answer tonight is one of appropriate degree. The proposition will put forth various arguments that conclude that the current level of prominence of allies within the movement is more than what would be appropriate to achieve our goals. However, I believe that there are certain characteristics particular to the LGBTQ community that necessitate the current degree of ally prominence. First, we are part of every community. You might find us anywhere from the farmhouse to the drag show, from the Pride March to the mosque, and from Uganda to the UK. We are distributed among different communities around the world, and in essentially all, we constitute a minority. So unlike other minority groups that have fought for their rights, we are by and large geographically and socially isolated. Transgender children do not come from just transgender families, grow up in transgender neighborhoods, attend transgender schools, or play with only other transgender kids. Instead, they grow up in social groups that are made up of mostly cisgender people who might accept and might reject their identity. Transgender children, like any children, depend on the acceptance of these communities for their self-worth and equality. Thus, they depend crucially on an individual level on something that can only be provided by a community of allies. A second particular characteristic is that in some cases, LGBTQ people are often socially invisible. This is due, in large part, to the fact that LGBTQ people are often discouraged from openly embracing their identities because of the unfriendly posture of certain individuals or social groups. Because of this invisibility and isolation, it is particularly infeasible for us to depend predominantly on each other for respect and social standing. We need allies to be vocal and prominent, to convey society's respect to members of the LGBTQ community who remain unknown to the world. Allies need to be loud, to reach every ear, especially those who are not yet comfortable expressing their identity. A final crucial point here is that allies perform a function within the LGBTQ movement that the rest of us simply cannot. Over the past few decades, allies have been essential in normalizing and popularizing the tolerance and later equal respect for those of us who might otherwise have been considered deviants. It is important to recognize the bravery of those LGBTQ individuals who rioted at Stonewall and other founders of this movement and those who work on our behalf today. Their sacrifice and struggle, breaking with social norms, is the impetus for our work today. And we must also recognize that when the brave pioneers of this activist movement spoke out, allies helped others see that their differences did not in any way detract from their equal humanity, and by consequence, their equal deservingness of love and dignity. On the other hand, some will argue that the prominence of ally voices in the LGBTQ movement drowns out, waters down, or unjustly alters the message of those within the community. This concern is valid. Why should outside voices dominate in a movement that is for our liberation and expression? A popular object of this criticism is Macklemore's hit song, Same Love. It is often considered an anthem of the gay rights movement, but was written and performed by an artist who identified himself as an ally. Why should this song be our song? To illustrate my disagreement with this point, I hope that the honorable members and guests will permit me to use an example from personal experience. The song came out right about the time that I did. A few days after I finally told my older sister, I was still questioning if and how I fit into our family. She picked me up from school or practice and said, "Michael, I want you to listen to this song." So she played Same Love in the car as I sat quietly. When it was over, she said something to the effect of, "I never understood what you had to go through." For me, it was the first time that I understood that my sister was on my side. The song, whatever its faults, provided a perspective that could help straight people understand the love a gay, bisexual, or lesbian person feels towards someone of the same sex. It is a song of this movement because it puts allies on our side, eliciting and demonstrating respect for our equally human experience. Allies, in this way, are able to bridge the gap in understanding between straight people and gay people. In this case, bringing sympathy to a group of potential allies. Perhaps Macklemore's work was self-serving, as he did profit immensely from the song. If that is the case, then all the better. It was the song's message that was popular and popularized, and this means we're making progress. Another objection is that in Britain and the US today, we have achieved enough progress through the work of activists that it's time for allies to step out of the way. But to espouse this view is to forget the difficult nature of progress. It is not always linear, or even continuous, or even maintained. We must defend it as we achieved it, by standing up for each other. To take an extreme example, it is easy to forget that in 1930s Berlin, homosexuals had achieved widespread social acceptance. But, as we know, this tolerance would not last very long. In the following years in Berlin, progress was gradually and systematically dismantled, first through isolation, then through persecution, and finally through extermination. We must not take our progress for granted. We must be vigilant and safeguarding the dignity of our fellow human beings from the turbulence of political change. We may all do this by speaking out loudly for each other. Honorable members and guests, finally tonight, I find it particularly fitting that the success or failure of this motion depends on the opinion of this august 200-year-old society. It is a body that is composed mostly of straight, cisgender people, although this may not be the case tonight. You, the individual member of this community, have the ultimate power over this movement here. It is only when you raise your voices that we may raise ours and hope that others will listen. Within communities just like this one, we must each defend the principle that we are all created equal, no matter how different. Tonight, as ever, it is each and every one of us that holds the tools to change the understanding of society. I hope that you will recognize this as your constant duty and promote the equality of others. Honorable members and guests, I urge you to oppose this motion. Thank you very much.